Thanks, Vivek Chadha. So welcome everyone. And I don't know if it's controversial, but when I was thinking about what I could spend more than half an hour talking, there's not many topics that I know enough about. So I thought I'll share about someone that I really admire and love and has changed my perspective on how I see life and different things, and really changed my perspective. So I was kind of hoping to do something that would be interesting, that would make us think a little bit differently, keep us occupied, and then hopefully also help us to grow in holiness, which is the point of hopefully everything that we do. The person that I picked her name is Flannery OConnor. She's a speaker, and we'll go into a little bit more about her life, her way of seeing things, why I think she's interesting and cool and different and can help us in our path to holiness. And along with Flannery, I also wanted to share a little bit about two concepts that are very much prevalent in all of her work and the way that she seems to see the world and how she's trying to help us in seeing our lives also. So tragedy, Flannery, and grace. So we'll begin with tragedy. We'll go into a little bit of Flannery, and then we'll end with her perspective of grace. I think for me personally, it's just been a journey getting to know her, even though she's passed away. The first time I heard about her, I think it was in passing in college. Someone had mentioned her. I thought her name was interesting. I was like, Flannery, who's called Flannery? Later on, I used to watch the show Lost. I don't know if anyone's seen it, but Lost had this reference to it where there's a person who was sitting on a bench and reading a book that said, everything that rises must converge. And I thought, what an interesting book name. Who was that? And I remember researching it, seeing it, thinking maybe I should get it, never got it. And then years later, I heard about it from Bishop Robert Barron, started reading one story, and I just got hooked. I just couldn't believe it was written by a woman in the 1940s and the 1950s in the South. I just couldn't imagine how someone in her environment could have a mind like her. So I thought she was very interesting, and she's definitely impacted me in how I see different difficult things that happen in my life and what they have to relate with faith and our journey to eternal life. So without wasting any more time, I'm gonna go in and share this. All right, so okay, so this is a little picture of her that I found. So if you look online and if you ever just Google image her pictures, you'll find all these very interesting images of her. She's known for her love for peacocks. She actually had 100 by the time when she passed away at the young age of in her 40s. So you can see there that she's holding a peacock, and I kind of like how the top part has a little cloud and there's sunshine, but there's also rain, so you can see there's a little bit of a push and pull between the light and the dark, and a little bit of pressure from evil things, but there's definitely some good and bright and beautiful things there as well. So I wanted to start, I was thinking, we're spending so much time together. It's very hard to explain. There's so many interesting things about her life, her way of seeing things, but I think it's hard to appreciate them or even get interested in her. If you look at pictures of her, she actually looks very proper. She wears glasses. She's typically wearing a dress that's high-necked, maybe a string of pearls, so she looks like a very proper Southern woman. So little would you know that her mind is so bright and she thinks so differently. So I thought maybe to begin our webinar, maybe we can start with me sharing a little bit about a couple of stories as we go through, just to get a sense of what her mind is like. So the first story is called The Life You Save May Be Your Own. It's a very short story, and it begins with, I tried to put pictures so we can visualize it a little better. It doesn't do justice to her story, so bear with me. So in the beginning of this story, The Life You Save May Be Your Own, you don't really know why the title is that way, and you have to kind of figure it out over time. So this guy is coming, he's coming out of nowhere, and he comes to this house that's kind of in the middle of nowhere, and he seems to be walking by. He doesn't have a lot to his name, and you can tell that he's very poor, and he's looking for work or maybe for food. You don't know what he's going for, but you find this guy who's going to this house in the middle of a prairie. Okay, so next, as he goes in, he finds this woman that you're sitting. She's an aged woman, and she's a little heavy set. And then she also has a daughter there who who's probably in her 20s or so, if I'm remembering correctly, but also has a learning disability, or not just a learning disability, but I think has just not developed properly. So she has some developmental challenges. So even though she has the body of a fairly young woman, her mind is still a little bit like a child. So you can see that she kind of twirls her hair. She's running around, obviously not mature for her age or appropriate for her age. So this guy comes in and he says, I'm a guy, I'm hardworking, I'm willing to work for money. If you'll just have me, I'll just fix things around the house. Just give me a place to stay and some food to eat, and I'll take care of your work. So the woman shows hesitation, and she seems to be talking a lot about how much she loves her daughter, who has some learning disabilities. And then after that, she, little by little, she agrees to letting him help around the house, and he does that. He's a very good worker. He takes time, gets everything done. They also have a little car in their shed. He fixes it up and makes it in order so that, they can actually run it. So he does all these things, and then slowly, the girl has, like some sort of a developmental issue, but she seems like she kind of likes him, and he kind of plays on that. So little by little, he pretty much asks the mother if he can get married to the daughter. And she at first, it seems like, oh no, like this isn't going to happen. How can I do that? I love my daughter so much. It would make me so sad to have to share her, blah, blah, blah. But then sure enough, little by little, she agrees to let the guy marry her daughter. And you can kind of tell it's a little bit strange, and you're kind of thinking, was that really the right decision? But she keeps insisting that she really loves her daughter, and she always wants to do the best that she can. Her whole life is for her daughter, all these different things. So they get married. Then after they get married, the man asks for a little bit of money for their honeymoon, to take a little bit of money for gas and for food so that they can go on a couple of days of a trip for their honeymoon. Then again, she says, well, do you really need that much? And then he's like, yeah, we definitely need all that money. And little by little, she says, okay, fine, but it's only because I love my daughter. It's only because I want her to have a good time. And then she finally sees them off. And then you kind of have the feeling that something's about to go wrong. And if you read enough of Flannery O'Connor's story, something always goes wrong. So you're kind of expecting it. So next what happens is they go a little while off, and then after that they stop at a diner. So at the diner, what happens is they start eating, but then in the middle of the meal, he gets up, he goes to the counter, he gives a little bit of extra money to the guy for his meal, for her meal, and a little bit extra, and he basically tells her, oh, there's this invalid who's eating here, but I'm a good man, so I'm going to give you a little bit of an extra money. Just take care of her. And she's too developmentally challenged to know what's going on, to even probably know that she got married, or that he's abandoning her very far away from where her mother is. And you can see in that picture there, she's just kind of sitting on the counter there, and he's leaving by the door. So he leaves her like this, and as a reader, you're just shocked and appalled that someone could do such a thing. And then after that, he goes on, he takes the car that he fixed up from her mother's house, and he leaves. And on the way, he picks someone up, and they have a conversation, and he basically tells this guy who abandoned the young girl, actually tells him how the world is so cruel and such an evil place, which is very ironic. And they drive by a sign, which you can kind of see on the right side of the picture, and it says, "The life you save may be your own." So that was meant to be a sign for wearing your seatbelt. So wear your seatbelt because the life you save may be your own. But actually for the story, can anyone guess from whoever's watching, if you can, why the story was called The Life You Save May Be Your Own? Any guesses? Vivek Chetan, you look like you're almost there and you've got an idea. So whose life is it, and who's saving who? What could it mean?
I think seatbelt, I don't know, maybe hers, or?
Yeah.
Mostly yes. I think hers. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So I think most of her titles, they do take a little bit of time to kind of chew, and they have many layers to it. So most people think that what this means is the life you save may be your own is actually referring to the mother of the girl. So it's saying that even though she's constantly saying, I'm doing this for the sake of my daughter, I love her, I'll do anything for her, oh, I don't want her to get married, oh, I don't want to give you the dowry. But basically what she's saying is she kind of probably knew in the back of her head that this would happen. He's a strange man. She has no history of him. She has no reason to trust him other than his good work ethic, but even then it's not been a long time. So the strong probability is that she knew that this might happen, but she was probably tired of taking care of her daughter and probably wanted her to be gone. So even though she's saying that she loves the daughter and everything is for her, the life that she's saving is actually her own. So even though she's working, saying, and doing things that seem like she's saving someone else's life, but the life that she's really saving is her own. So you can kind of see the way Flannery will take simple seatbelt advertisements and be able to put a spotlight on human nature in a way which is very surprising and difficult and hard to admit. So, I mean, if we think about the world in that way, it's hard to admit that things like this happen. It's hard to stomach it, and it's very hard to imagine that a little nice woman in a black dress with a string of pearls is writing stories like this. So this is sort of a small taste of what her stories are like. So obviously one of the big main themes in all of her stories is this huge tragedy that happens in the lives of someone. So it can be someone like we just talked about, the girl who had developmental issues. It could be somebody who lost their spouse. It could be somebody, an entire family has been shot dead. There's a man who was beaten by his wife. There's a child who has a very harsh coming of age experience. There's a father whose son committed suicide. So in every single one of her stories, there's a huge tragedy that happens. So for me, this was very interesting because with Jesus Youth, I had the opportunity to go for mission work to Haiti. And when I went to Haiti, I think whatever little faith that I thought I had was really shaken, because there's just so much pain and tragedy there that it's hard to imagine that there's a God who is good and he's powerful and he cares and he loves us, and he's still allowing these terrible, terrible things to happen to people he supposedly loves. So for me, like, I went there because I thought God loves me and God loves people and he's a good God and I wanted to serve him. But looking at people starving day in and day out, and seeing parents who abandoned their children, or parents who had to feed their kids with mud just so they would stop crying because they were too hungry, it was very difficult to really believe and say God is good and he's powerful, because it just didn't make sense. For me, it was like, okay, either he's powerful and he doesn't love us, so he's leaving us, or maybe he really does love us, but he can't help us. How can you have both? So, and I think most people, even atheists who bring up all these complex arguments about why faith isn't real, I think many times you can really trace it back to even life events where it's hard to understand tragedy and to make sense of it. So the problem of suffering, the problem of why evil exists, whether it's in calamities or the evil people do, the losses we suffer, the diseases we go through, there's always that challenge to faith. And we also know that it's one thing, like, okay, I'm not very good at giving thanks to God when things are good, but I think the challenge of faith is always when you're going through a deep personal tragedy, to still believe in a God that is good, to leave him close. So for me, it's been sort of a lifelong journey searching for what are the answers. I think some of the people here know I grew up with a Hindu dad and a Catholic mom. I was only baptized in about 4th grade, so until then I'd go to the Hindu temple on Sunday mornings, and in the evenings we'd go for Sunday Mass, and it was only in 4th grade I was baptized. And fast forward, it took me until college until I decided that I wanted to be confirmed in the Catholic faith. So one of the big things that I was looking for was what are the different religions teach, and how are they really different from each other, besides the cultural practices, besides the prayers that everyone recites. What is so different? So I think one of the big things that we can say as Catholics, as Christians, that we're different, and a huge reason for us to give hope to the world is the church's teachings on what suffering can be and the way that the church approaches suffering, which we can really see from Flannery's life and her story. So I picked Hinduism first. So I would say with Hinduism, there's different ways that Hinduism looks at it. I'm not an expert on any world religions by by any means. This is a little bit from my personal research and reading, and also just practically speaking how Hindus, Muslims, Buddhists live, just a lived experience. So for Hindus, a lot of times, there are concepts like karma. So one way of dealing with all the bad things happen is you just keep trying to do good, and eventually the good that you do will return to you, and the evil that people do, evil will go to them. So that's one way that Hindus probably reconcile being able to go through life. So that's the Hindu version of how suffering makes sense. So even maybe you were a good person, but maybe it's your great uncle's sins that are coming to you. Maybe it's a generational sin. Maybe you're being punished for something. So whatever it is, it's not something you can control, only to some degree. So that's Hinduism. The next is Islam. You can see there's a sense of righteousness. There's a sense of fixing things. There's definitely rewards, and I know this is a sensitive time for Islam, so not saying Islam's an evil religion or anything like that, but there is a sense of if you die for the faith or anything like that, you will definitely get to paradise, and the world is just, there's no meaning in suffering. You just kind of do and make sure you get to paradise. So I guess that's one way that I've seen, kind of from my perspective, Islam kind of talking about suffering. And then finally, the next one is Buddhism, and I picked this image because you can see a Buddhist monk who's peaceful. His eyes are closed. There's no people around him. He's kind of secluded in a nice place, closed eyes, probably meditating. Of course, that's not easy, but one of the things their teaches is every desire is bad. If you just get rid of all your desires, you'll never be disappointed. You'll never be hurt. So that's one way of getting rid of suffering. So there is a way that you can get rid of suffering. Just completely kill any desires that you have. So for me, as I'm going through these different things, I'm still not finding really a path through this. There's nothing quite going right in the middle of it, and excuse me, just kind of really explaining it. So then I found a book by G.K. Chesterton called Orthodoxy. And once I read that book, I could never go back again, and I could never doubt the Christian faith. And one interesting thing that he said, and he was a convert to Catholicism, and he said the Buddhist saint always has his eyes shut, while the Christian saint always has them very wide open. So here I have a picture of you have on the side, I think it's Buddha, but typical Buddhist images, they're all with their eyes closed, but you see all these saints that are there. There's men, women, there's somewhat modern looking people, there's non-modern looking people, there's someone with a lamb, some of them are married, some of them are religious, some of them are a bishop, all these different people. But if you notice, I think every single one of them has their eyes open. So it's this interesting way that Christianity really differs from every world religion, in that Christianity has a path and a capacity to really be able to hold all the complexities, the difficulties, the challenges, and the pains that come across in life, and still be able to hold that there is one God. He is true, He's good, and He loves us. And that's obviously not a very simple thing for any of us to be able to do, but that's a path that Christianity offers. So it's very interesting that how different and radical it is. It's not just that we believe in paradise, absolutely. And like Hinduism said, we believe in good works. We think it's important, and we think it matters, it makes a difference, but there's more than that. And we think, yes, there's a need for detachment, but we don't do it for ourselves. The reason why a woman leaves and goes to a cloister convent isn't to find her own peace. It's not to run away from suffering. In fact, she probably knows that she'll encounter probably more sufferings than she would if she was married. So going back to Flannery and how this connects, her way of looking at how suffering works with Christian faith. So she has an interesting take on it. And she talks about the truth, and so I put a little heading, Tragedy and Truth. The truth does not change according to one's ability to stomach it emotionally. So you can see right away that she's very tough. The truth does not change according to our ability to stomach it emotionally. A higher paradox confounds emotion as well as reason, and there are long periods in the lives of all of us and of the saints when the truth as revealed by faith is hideous, emotionally disturbing, and downright repulsive. So she's not just saying that, oh, like, you know, bear through it. She's saying, well, the reality is that your mind will not be able to handle the truth. You are stuck in yourself, and it will take a long time for you to be able to get to the truth. And even when you find the truth, it may not be some perfect chiseled marble. It could actually be, and it probably will be, hideous, emotionally disturbing, and downright repulsive. And we'll run away from it, but we're running away from the truth. And she also, you know, the way that she talks about, there's a higher paradox, and it confounds our emotions. So our emotions aren't able to handle it, and there's long periods of time. This is not a paper that you can write in 2 days. This is a journey of a lifetime, that there's a long period of our life where there's just darkness and incapacity to be able to understand. So her perspective is that, yes, this will happen. So her way of looking at tragedy is actually, tragedy is an invitation for us to transcend who we would have been if we didn't have that tragedy. And I think practically, if we look at the world, we can kind of see that. I remember when I first came across the Christian concept of what suffering does and how it can change us, I remember thinking, wow, like, you know, you can look at, you know, serial killers like Jeffrey Dahmer, who did crazy things, and you can look at their childhood and say, wow, they had a terrible childhood. I can understand a little bit. You can look at Hitler and look at his childhood and say, yeah, I can understand that. Or in India, I remember there was a bandit queen, and hearing her story in the past, like all the sexual abuse she'd gone through, I could understand why she took up guns and started killing. So on one hand, you can see that, okay, like when you go through a tragedy, it changes you and it makes you rougher. But on the other hand, in the Christian context, I also found someone like Pope St. John Paul II, who had his entire family killed, but he became a hope for others, even forgave the person who tried to shoot him. And many, many saints, Saint Maria Goretti, who is a saint not just because she fought for her purity, but because she actually wanted her rapist to go to heaven with her while she was a little young girl. So we have a tradition where it says that, you know what, when you have tragedy in your life, something great can also happen. And we can reasonably wonder, okay, if JP2 didn't go through so much suffering in his life, would he or would he not have turned out as great of a man as he is? And we don't know. And what our faith tells us is that every tragedy we have, it sort of breaks the bounds of who we are, and it forces us to come out of ourselves. So I imagine sometimes if JP2's family was okay, Poland was not under the Nazis, maybe being such a talented and handsome man, and one who was so much desiring to be close to people, I could see him being an amazing husband and having a beautiful family. But his tragedy forced him to think about the deeper meaning of life. It forced him to think about people, and you can see that as a result, he became a man that gave hope to millions. And he's literally changed the world. He was instrumental in the downfall of communism and so many other things. Even reading his writings, I'm sure there's such an impact. So her perspective is that, yes, it feels bad and it feels terrible, but what it does is it breaks you out of this small little bubble that you would live in your whole life. So it's an interesting perspective to have, and you can see. And then when you start reading her stories, you start seeing that, yes, there's a lot of tragedy, but at the same time, you can see how every tragedy is very much a chance for the person to change also. And we'll talk about a couple of other stories soon, so we'll see that. All right. So the next story that I wanted to share about is Good Country People. This was probably the most disturbing story that I read, and also, of course, I wanted to share it. So Good Country People begins kind of how it sounds. It sounds a little holly jolly, good country people coming through. And then, so this picture kind of begins with, so there's a guy who's coming in, he has a briefcase in his hand, and he's actually a person who's a salesman for Bibles. So he's a young man, obviously unmarried, a little disheveled, but he's here to sell Bibles. And then a mother is opening the door and she's welcoming, and you see off to the side, there's a girl who is pretty grown up, doesn't look the most attractive or feminine. And if you look closely at her feet, you see that there's a wooden foot actually in one of them. So she's actually a disabled person. She lost her leg with something, and within the story we find out that that she actually has a fake leg on, but she's very intellectual. She's very, very educated, probably the most educated person there. but she also seems to have a terrible temper, and very mean to her mother and the other woman in the house, always in a foul mood, very intelligent, but very putting everybody down pretty much, never in a good mood. So in the course of this story, this man comes and he's trying to sell the Bible. His mom's just like, you know what, this is what good people are made out of. This is good country people, good faith, you know, like good morals, trying to do the right thing, trying to sell the Bible, blah, blah, blah. And then meanwhile, the woman over here, the girl, and she actually tries to change her name to an ugly name. I think Bertha was the name that she chose, so a very unattractive name, just kind of to be sort of stick it to her mother, I guess. So she actually maintains that she is an atheist and that she's too intelligent to have faith. So she looks at this guy and she's like, yeah, of course he has faith. He's an idiot. He doesn't know how the world works. He's not educated, and of course he believes, you know, in God and in Bible and blah, blah, blah. So she kind of wants to take him down. So what she ends up, so they end up kind of having a conversation, and he's in town for that period. He's selling Bibles at different houses. They end up meeting, and she kind of seems almost like she wants to prove to her mother that everyone's stupid and that she's intelligent, and that faith is stupid and atheism is intelligent. So she ends up talking, and they end up meeting, and you can see that there's some sort of an attraction between the two of them. Then they go off, and they actually meet at a barn. I tried to get pictures, but they're not all the same, so bear with me on the images. So then they actually meet in the barn, and you can see that they're about to become intimate. They're getting closer, they're whispering, they're talking, revealing different things about each other. And she kind of has this, you can kind of tell that she's getting off on it a little bit, because she feels like she's corrupting a good man with a good faith, and she's kind of proving to herself and others that he doesn't really have faith, and that he's just as bad as he is, and that people don't really stick to their morals or something like that. So she thinks that she's seducing him. And then while he's talking to her, he asks her if he can take her prosthetic leg out. And probably, you know, because it seems like they're getting closer to becoming intimate. In the meantime, he pulls out a box which looked like it probably had some religious articles or something like that. But when he opens it, there's a condom in there. So she realizes he's very duplicitous. It's not just that he happened to fall for her and she seduced him, but he's actually like that. And so then by this time she's already allowed him to remove her leg, and they get close, and then he puts the leg away from her, and then he opens up his suitcase that he always carries. And within the suitcase, there's actually different pieces of, you can see things that were necessary for different disabled people. So there's the eye of some blind person. So she kind of starts to realize really quickly that he's actually a very sick and twisted man, and he probably, I don't know if it's whether he wanted to collect them for his own pleasure or if it was something that he was selling off, but he actually keeps them, and all of a sudden she gets really scared. She wants to leave, but it's too late, and he doesn't end up raping her, thank God. I don't think I could read through the rest of the story, but he actually leaves with her leg and he runs away, and she's just stuck there in like a high room inside a barn without her leg. And you can see in this moment just such a deep devastation. And I just remember thinking, man, like what kind of a sick, twisted mind could come up with a story like that? And it was just so much for the senses to take in. But then slowly you start to see this woman had a very simplistic idea of what faith is and what people of faith are. She didn't realize that, you know what, like there's a lot of crooked people who actually don't have faith, and they may actually put on the mask of faith, but that doesn't mean that all intelligent people don't have faith. It may be that they have faith or that they use faith. She also, you can tell that in a way that she wanted to use her unattractiveness, even taking on an unattractive name, to kind of take on the ugliness that she possibly felt because of her disability, by changing her name to Bertha and bothering her mother. But in that instance, she might have realized that, yes, actually, I do want intimacy, I do want closeness. And in him taking her leg off, maybe she realized that, you know what, like the people that are close to me, like my mom who always took care of me, the family friend that's always been there, they're the people who always take care of me, and I've been presenting such an ugly front to them. I'm constantly going after them, but really inside me is a heart that genuinely believes in what is good. Inside me is a heart that wants to be loved. Inside me is a heart that wants to connect. And you know what? I've been blessed this whole time, and I can't use my disability as a way to punish the whole world and be bitter for the rest of my life. So you can kind of see that this might be a place for a tragedy in her life, but which is unspeakable. And to be honest, like I don't know how you would survive something like that. And we know that things like this happen in the world, but it's also very much an invitation for a woman to really change the course of her life. So these kind of stories are pretty much what Flannery O'Connor's stories are all like. They're very violent, they're very shocking, they're, just like she said, very hard to stomach, repulsive, emotionally ugly, hideous, all those things. But you can see that it's not completely terrible because it represents a chance to be more than what you were. It represents a chance to get out of who you used to be. So it's very unique and beautiful. So, and the last picture I led was just to kind of give you a sense of what the man kind of felt like. He's taking her leg away. So very much exploitative. And Flannery O'Connor, in terms of the genre of literature, is very unique in that she's one of the few people that actually wrote about people who are handicapped and being used and things like that. Because typically in literature, that's a very taboo topic. So you can see that she approaches it. So you can kind of wonder if she's just kind of doing this gratuitously, but this quote that she has, I think, helps us understand why she goes into things the way that she does. And she says, "The novelist with Christian concerns will find in modern life distortions which are repugnant to him, and his problem will be to make these appear as distortions to an audience which is used to seeing them as natural." So I think we can all see, I see a lot of parents on the call. I'm sure when you look at TV, you realize everything that seems normal is actually very abnormal. And the task of a Christian writer today is to show what's abnormal and to show what's normal. And that has to be done in a very difficult way. So she goes on, "And he may well be forced to take an ever more violent means to get his vision across to this hostile audience. When you assume that your audience holds the same beliefs as you can relax a little and use more normal ways of talking to it. But when you have to assume that it does not, then you have to make your vision apparent by shock. To the hard of hearing you shout, and for the blind you draw large and startling figures." So you can see that it's not that she enjoys like some sort of a sadistic thing, but she feels that it's necessary for us to have our senses shocked in order for us to be able to come out of seeing things in the wrong way. So quickly, a little bit about Flannery O'Connor and how did this mind become what it is, and how did a woman come up with these things? It makes sense in the story of her life. So she was actually born in the 1920s in Georgia in the Southern America. She was born, she was a little bit introverted, and actually at 15, her dad came down with lupus, which is an autoimmune disease, and he died quickly after. So very soon in life, she herself went through a huge tragedy, which I'm sure shook her a lot. And then in another 10 years, when she was 25 years old, she was actually diagnosed with the same disease, lupus as well, autoimmune, so she knew that she was going to die. She was actually given just 4 years to live, but she ended up living for 15, which is a lot more. But I think we can imagine for a woman of 25 finding out that she has an autoimmune disease and she's going to die within 4 years. And I mean, praise God that she was able to live for 15 years, but I mean, the last 10 years, you don't know how long you're going to live. She never was married. We don't know if she made a consecration in her heart in a private way, or if she just simply didn't get married because she knew that she was going to die and it was the responsible thing to do. So we actually don't know. So in her own life, we can see that she is someone who's qualified to talk about tragedy. She is someone who probably struggled herself. But there's also very funny and quirky things about her. So like I mentioned before, there's always peacocks. Whenever you see Flannery, she was a bird lover. By the time she died, she had 100 peacocks. And she talks about funny stories about delivery men who would ask her, what's the point of having peacocks? And to this, she would answer, if you look at a peacock dance and you ask me what's the point, I cannot explain it to you. If you don't see it in the dancing peacock, you won't be able to understand it from what I'm saying. So she has a very quirky sense of humor and unique ways of doing things as well. She was very much a Catholic, very much an intellectual. Her library showed that she very much knew a lot about theology. She actually kept the Summa Theologica, written by St. Thomas Aquinas, on her bedpost. That's the last thing she would read before she fell asleep. There's references to him all over her stories. She was a devout Catholic. There's pictures of her sitting with nuns. There's a lot of stories about her and what she's written in her prayers about her devotion to the Eucharist. She was very much a Southerner. She was very well-mannered, wore the string of pearls, the appropriate dresses. Obviously, she was hurt. She was clever. She was also a very good friend. So she wrote a ton of letters to people who wrote to her. She was very unconventional for her time. So she was actually friends with people who experienced same-sex attraction. She understood people who, there's a story that she's written about a hermaphrodite person, that means with genitalia of male and women, but men and women, and she does it with a lot of concern and care, never at all compromising on the Catholic teachings. But you can imagine in the 1940s to have compassion and love for Black people, and knowing that racism was wrong, for knowing that people should not be ostracized because of their same-sex attraction, even though it's wrong to teach them it's wrong, but to give them a path for holiness. These are all things that she already knew, and we can imagine she had a lot to think about and pray about in her life. So definitely a very interesting person. So that's that. And I wanted to share a little bit about, she really is a bright mind, and I think that's something that we can see in her stories, the way she sets them up. Her mind is bright both in terms of the way that she gets you involved in her characters and how quickly you become familiar, and you can see it's very human. You don't feel like it's a fabricated story, but she's also very insightful, and you can see that she's always struggling with her mind in a sense. Even though it's her gift, it's also her challenge. So this is a prayer that was found in her journal years after she died. Dear God, I cannot love thee the way I want to. You are the slim crescent of a moon that I see, and myself is the earth's shadow that keeps me from seeing all of the moon. The crescent is very beautiful, and perhaps that is all one like I am should or could see. But what I am afraid of, dear God, is that my self-shadow will grow so large that it blocks the whole moon, and that I will judge myself by the shadow that is nothing. I do not know you, God, because I am in the way. Help me to push myself aside. So you can definitely see in her desire, as intelligent as she is, she knows that by her own mind, she can't know God, and that she's always in the way. So you would think a person with lupus, whose dad died with lupus, would be tired of it, but she actually still is able to see that she's in the way of who God is. And she can see that the only reason why she only sees a crescent, the moon is always whole, but sometimes we only see a crescent of the moon because the earth's darkness, it's the earth that's putting the shadow. It's not the moon who has left the earth, but it's the earth that's putting the darkness. And she says, maybe someone like me doesn't deserve to see more of God than this, but God, help me to get out of the way and don't let me die in this darkness. And there's a little bit more of her prayer. We'll move on. So finally, we come to the point of grace. And I think I was just doing a little Google image search, as I do with everything else on grace. And I think most people will agree, when we think about grace, we tend to think about, to my mind, I see a white, fluffy little feather slowly making its way down gently, or maybe like soft snow, beautiful snowflakes coming down gently and coming, something fluffy, something white, something luminous, something beautiful. But Flannery's idea of grace is that it's more like a hammer to the head. It knocks your teeth out and it'll give you, it'll make you blue in the eyes, because her perspective was all human nature vigorously resists grace because grace changes us and the change is painful. So her perspective was, we always pray, God, give me grace to do this, God, give me grace to do that. But if you think about it and you read in scriptures all over the place, it says grace abounds. Where sin abounds, grace abounds even more. So why is it that our world is so devoid of grace? It's because we're the ones who can't receive it, because grace makes us change. Grace is not magical. Grace requires our participation, and that's why we don't have much grace, because it always comes in a way that we don't want to swallow it. And I think even for me, in some of my prayer experiences, I remember about 3 Easters ago, there was one particular humiliation that I had faced, and something my family was going through. And I just remember thinking, Lord, why did you allow this in my life? Any other pain, maybe physical pain, maybe even cancer, I would have preferred that than you allow my family to go through such a pain. And I went to adoration, I couldn't even be with the people that I loved because I was in so much pain. And when I went to adoration, I was reminded of a childhood memory that I'd completely forgotten, of me being very mean to one of the women that worked in my house. And I felt the Lord tell me, even when you were a child, before you knew what was sin and what was good, you had a conscience and you chose to be proud. You chose to hurt those people. And if I let you leave, if I kept you that way, if I kept your pride intact, you would never be holy and you would never come out of yourself. You would never know what it feels like for people to have pain. And I needed to do this to you so that you would be able to come out of that. And yes, you could be happier. Yes, you would have been peaceful, but you wouldn't be kneeling before me and your heart wouldn't be changed if it wasn't for that. And if I could do anything less than that, I would do, but you are so proud that I had to do something that big and that bad to you. And that was the only way that you've listened. If I could just give you a small inspiration in prayer and if you take it, I would do that. But the way that you are, Simi, you need something that bad and that big to happen to be able to move and change. And I remember fighting and hating God for it, but before I left adoration, just saying, Lord, thank you so much for not leaving me to that. And I think many times we ask God, Lord, don't deprive me of something good. But what we don't realize is that if we had that good, the good would deprive us of the greatest good there is. And the greatest good there is heaven. So all the tragedies in our life have a place to show us something greater and bigger, to make us more human, to make us more loving and bring our hearts. So in her perspective, grace is very beautiful. And this is very much something we can see in many Christian writings. I took a small writing that C.S. Lewis had written, and it said, the imperfect world incites us to choose either deep meaning or superficiality, compassion or indifference, love or egocentricity, co-responsibility or domination, gentleness or harshness, surrender to God or self-idolatry, legacy of contribution and hope or of deprivation and despair, sources of light or darkness, pointing to our transcendent and eternal dignity or our material and temporal one. So what he's saying is that while we're busy praying to God and asking him, begging him, why don't you give me this? Why don't you give me that? This wasn't good because it didn't feel good. That wasn't good because it made me uncomfortable. Meanwhile, God is looking at us and he's not worried about how big of a home we had. He's not worried about how much pleasure we got in our life. He's not worried about how nice our friends were to us. He knows that finally what we'll leave this earth with is who we are in our hearts, the good works that we've done, and how much we've loved. So he's more concerned about who we become as persons. And he's doing everything in his power, and he's allowing many things to happen to us, but only in so much as that they allow us to become someone different, even though it's in a very difficult way and we don't want it. So our focus is always on shallower pleasures, and his focus is always on a deeper and more beautiful way of being. So that's pretty much the end of this slide. And I think that's sort of the note I want to end in, is that tragedy in itself is never something that Christians are happy about. We work very hard to lessen people's suffering, so it's not like we're masochistic. I'm not going to come after Michelle and beat her and say, Michelle, this is so you can receive grace. No, we never invite that. We never take pleasure in pain. But what we do is we recognize that our God is greater than the biggest tragedies that human beings have got. Our God is greater than the most confounding things that we come across. And we trust that even if we go through decades of not understanding, even if we have many things going on in our life that we can't hold through, that we will still, by virtue of our faith, hold in our mind that something terrible is happening in our life, and God is still good, and he still loves us, and he's preparing us for something much better. And it's better to lose this than to have something eternal. So it's sort of like if Vivek Chetan was taking his child for a shot. Of course, the child is looking at the injection and saying, how could you let me go to a doctor who'll poke me with something so sharp and so terrible, and it hurts? How could you ever do that to me? How can you say that you're good? But it's not that Vivek is happy about, the child being in pain, and he doesn't enjoy the child crying, but he knows it's better that the child cry and be saved from such a painful disease than the child be happy playing around and say, oh, Daddy, I love you so much. You got me my favorite candy, but then maybe have polio at the end or something like that. So as Christians, we trust in our God as a good father and as a loving father and someone who's there for us. And I think Flannery's thing is very violent to the senses. It's very violent to our emotions, but it's in a very beautiful way because it gives us an appetite for life. It makes us break our boundaries of what we'll allow. I remember even taking to prayer, what if somebody assaulted me? Would I still be okay with it? Would I allow God? And I mean, interiorly, I was able to come to it. I can't say that I know I'll do that, but it kind of breaks the boundaries of how much we'll allow God to break us, how far we'll allow God to push us, and what kind of tragedies we'll allow. And we know we have saints who've been raped. We have saints who've been killed. We have saints who were tortured. We have saints who were crucified. We have saints who were skinned. And in every other place people would hide, like at your job, if you go for an interview, they're never going to tell you if, like the break room is tiny. They always hide the bad things and they always show the good things. But if you go to Mass when there's a martyr, what do? There's a bright red vestment. The table is covered with a big red cloth. And the church is like, look at these saints. We don't even know what heaven is like. But even to those idiots like us who don't know what heaven is like, the church is still saying, look at this. They died so gloriously. For a human being, it's like, what is so glorious about that? But it's because the church is always pointing to heaven. She's always pointing to her spouse, Jesus Christ, who loves us eternally and will stop at nothing. And he's always there with us, and he's always giving us chances to move beyond ourselves. So that is Tragedy, Flannery, and Grace, a little taste. I hope this makes you want to go and read they're all short stories, so very much worth reading. I hope that it's something that's helpful for you. I hope you end up reading a short story or two. Some of my favorites are, I think the one that I love the most is probably Temple of the Holy Spirit. That's a great one. And the two that I shared are also good ones, but feel free to contact me if you want a link for a free PDF with her stories. But I hope and pray that we all will be able to take the tragedies that God gives us in our lives as blessings, that we'll be able to hold them along with our belief that God is good, that we'll be proud of being Christian, we'll be proud of being Catholic, that God willing, we'll become saints, canonized or not, and that when that happens, that people will remember that our eyes were open. When they see pictures of us, it won't be a Simi with our eyes closed saying, forget you people and whatever you do, but it'll be eyes of people who have eyes wide open, who've been able to handle the painful, painful circumstances of life and really gone beyond that because their faith carried them through. So maybe we'll say a Hail Mary to our dearest mother. And Flannery had a beautiful prayer where she said that she asked Mother Mary to give her more love for Jesus, and she asked Jesus to give her more love for Mother Mary. So maybe we'll do that, and we'll end before any questions. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Any questions? That was a lot of Flannery.
A lot of tragedy. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, people can unmute yourself and if you have anything, just please. If you have anything to share or any questions. Yeah, I think already got. I think that's a good point because I was reading a book recently. I actually just finished up. The movie is coming out. It's about a kid terminally ill with a abnormal stomach infection, and she actually when she was playing, she actually gets swallowed into a tree. They actually spend 4 hours taking her out. And when she's out, inside that tree, she actually sees Jesus. And he said, you have to go back because you're not ready here in the earth. You have to do a lot of things in earth. So she goes back and she's healed. So actually, it's a real story, and the movie is coming out. So it shows. I don't remember the movie's name. The book name. But I just finished it. So I think that shows that the amount of the tragedy brings the fruit out, because that's something, and they are running a ministry now. So
Beautiful, yeah. And I've heard of some amazing families who spoke about, years of not being able to conceive and how that really changed their understanding of what family life is meant to be, or people who have children with disabilities, and saying that they never understood the dignity of human life and how who you are and the dignity you have doesn't depend on what you can, those aren't things that, you don't hope that you need those things, but many times we're so slow to learn, and it's not God's way of punishing us, but in a strange and beautiful way, God allows those things in our life, and knowing that this life is short and there's a long eternity coming up afterwards. So yeah, thanks for sharing, Vivek Jada.
Anybody else?
All right, well, thank you everyone for joining. I also wanted to kind of reiterate what Vivek Chetan had said in the beginning. On January 23rd and 24th is the For Life National Conference, and then on January 22nd is the March for Life. So I'm pretty sure that all the registration forms are on the website already. Is that right, Vivek Chetan?
Right. Yep.
Yep. So if you can, please do that. And thank you, everyone. And I have to confess that I do sometimes pray for Flannery OConnor's and for her intercession. She's definitely not on like the path to sainthood, but sometimes I imagine, okay, even if she's in purgatory, maybe she'll pray for us. So thank you for joining, and God bless you. Good night.